Tequila. All right, so this is video number 1, 2, 3, my 4th video in this series on how to get good at playing video games. This video is going to be about how to beat a game, like the process, the training process of how to beat a single game. I'm going to break it up basically into 3 parts. Step 1 is getting to know a game. Step 2 is routing out a game and researching it. Step 3 is executing, actually beating the game. So step 1, getting to know a game. So just play it like you would when you were a little kid. Like if it's a console game, just play through until you game over a couple times and you get bored. If it's an arcade game, credit feed through it. And one thing you can do if it's like a scrolling game, like an auto scroller, like a shooter, you can just credit feed and drop bombs and don't even try and move your sprite around. Just drop bombs and die and credit feed and just check out all the art. Like that's what I like to do. And you can just credit feed and bomb and you don't even have to pay attention to what you're doing, and you can take in like the art design of the enemies and the stage. And you know, a lot of games, once you start playing them, you're not really going to have time to like stop and smell the roses. So this is your opportunity to do that. During the getting to know it phase, you're also auditioning the game and seeing if this is a game you really want to spend the next month of your life, the rest of your game time you have to spend on games for the next month, if you want to devote that to this game. If you don't like this game while you're playing it in this auditioning phase, just drop it. Play something else. And don't feel like you got to play a game because everyone says it's a great game. Like Gunstar Heroes. I love treasure games. I like run and guns. I love the Sega Genesis. I cannot play Gunstar Heroes. Every time I play it, I just, I hate to say it, I get bored. And it's nothing against that game. There's games that I love that you're not gonna enjoy. Like certain games speak to you and certain games don't. So, you'll see these games and you want to play them. What I like to do after I beat a game is I just do this getting to know it phase of games. I just start playing games until one grabs me. Yeah, getting to know it. Okay, in this phase of your training to beat a game, I like to include reading the manual to the game if you can get it. Like the other day, it was a year ago, I was playing Shinobi 3 on the Sega Genesis, and I didn't know, I played through that whole game and beat it, and I didn't know you could block. Like I remember after I beat it, I was watching some other people's playthroughs because I was still kind of enjoying having beat the game and taking in other people's opinions and going on Reddit and commenting, all that phase. But I'm doing that and I'm noticing that people blocked in this game and I didn't even know you could block. I played through the whole game and missed a mechanic because I didn't read the manual, and I just never happened to hit that button combination through my playthrough. And I did that, partly this happened because I didn't want to watch any playthroughs to make the game too easy because it wasn't that hard of a game. But, I should have read the manual. So that I include that in this part of the game, this part of beating a game. The getting to know it phase, read the manual. Don't read a strategy guide. Those are different. Those big ass strategy guides that are like a book that you might get with like Final Fantasy 3. Don't read one of those. That's not getting to know a game. That's like routing a game out and researching a game. So let's just jump into that right now. The next phase, okay, you've decided you like this game, you've gotten to know it, you figured out the mechanics, and you died a bunch of times and kind of took in the aesthetic of the game. Now you're ready. Okay, I'm gonna beat this game. Now, first thing to do is to route it out. With the emulator, it's easy. It's just cut and dry. You just make save states, boom, 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 all the way through the game. I typically get like 20 on an arcade game, 20 to 30 save states. Save state at the beginning of every level, save state at every boss, every difficult part of the game. I'll make a save state. Get liberal with it. Just make a bunch. If you don't use them, that's fine. You can make as many as you want. And then after you do that, you just go from the beginning of the game, every save state, and play through each save state till you can beat it, say 3 times in a row. And then you got that part by the ass. You move on to the next section, the next save state. And you can kind of do this on console games, or I should say you can do this without emulation if you use cheat codes. A lot of arcade games have cheat codes built in too. And if you don't want to use save states, you can use cheat codes. Or if you want to use original hardware on a console, use Game Genie codes. Some, you know, like the infamous Contra code, up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, BA, start, select start if you have friends. Yeah, that kind of stuff. And that's a great code, 30 lives. So if you're going to use extra lives, or excuse me, if you're going to use cheat codes, extra lives are a great one to use. You don't want to use like infinite jump or something. That's useless. Cheat codes for extra lives, or excuse me, infinite lives, infinite continues, those are useful. And they kind of mimic what save states do, because games have built-in save states, right? Like they have checkpoints that you get to. If you die, you go back to the previous checkpoint. It's kind of like dying and going back to your save state. Except that they're, you know, not as spread out, or they're not in the exact spot you want. But if the game's not that hard, it doesn't really make that big of a difference. So once you enable infinite lives, you basically just made save states slightly less convenient than save states. And this brings up a point is, well, how many tools do you want to use to beat this game? Well, it depends on how hard the game is and how good you are. If the game's easy, I use less. Like on console games, I don't use any save states. I won't use emulation. I often won't even use cheat codes. If the game's super hard, like say like Dodonpachi, and I'm trying to get an arcade 1 credit clear, I'm gonna use all the tools at my disposal. So we talked about save states, we talked about using Game Genie and cheat codes, you know, and that's kind of like how to like route out the game and create sections that you can play, you know, and you can get good at. You can also, so besides those tools, you have research. You can go research the game. Like now, man, you can just load up a YouTube playthrough and see how somebody beat it. You can go online and read a playthrough. Sometimes it's easier to read a playthrough than it is to watch a full playthrough. Like an example of this is I was playing Castlevania Chronicles a couple days ago. I got a clear on that, original mode. And I didn't want to watch a full playthrough. You don't really need to do that for that type of game, but I wanted to know where a specific item was in that game, where they were spread out, because it was my favorite item to use. It's an item that renews your health. And so I just wanted to know where the item was. It's easier to just get a document you can read and go to the item section, or kind of sift through that, or like a Google like search in text for this word, and you can do that in a document. And I just wanted to find where that item was. And if you wanted to watch a playthrough, that would be more difficult. You'd have to watch like the whole playthrough and scrub through it to see where the item was. So in that instance, just reading a document was more conducive to my learning process. And sometimes you want to watch a full playthrough, like if the game's super hard, it's a shooter, or you're on a boss and you just want to see, how do I beat this boss? Just, you know, scrub through to that section of the playthrough where he's beating the boss. Yeah, so you got that as a technique. Yeah, what else to say about that? So yeah, so those are the tools at your disposal. But you don't always want to use all the tools at your disposal. A good example of that is a role-playing game. Like, you'll break the role-playing game if you look up a playthrough. You're not role-playing anymore. Like, these games are made so that you can put yourself in the role. That's why it's called a role-playing game. Like a lot of Japanese JRPGs, they will have the protagonist not even speak through the whole game, so it's easier for you to imagine yourself as the protagonist. So you can't put yourself in the role and be creative if you're just watching someone's playthrough. Now you're just like basically reading an instruction manual and building IKEA furniture. You're not role-playing anymore. That's the most obvious example. A less obvious example would be the Legendary Axe on the TurboGrafx. I played through that a little while ago. Got a video on my channel. And you don't want to watch a playthrough on that because, okay, so that game's like this. Each enemy in the game is kind of like a mini boss. They each have they have an attack pattern that the first time you play it, they're going to kill you. It's like a pick up and die game. But once you figure out their attack pattern, they're pretty easy. Each enemy is, and they're very predictable. And part of the fun of that game is figuring out each enemy's attack pattern. So if you just watch a playthrough, you remove that aspect of the game. You know, you kind of broke it. So when I played that game, I didn't watch any playthroughs. that's a game you don't really want input on. However, when I got to the end of that game, there's this fucking labyrinth section, and it's a pretty involved labyrinth. And I couldn't, I tried like twice to get through it and gave up and just watched a playthrough. And I read the instruction manual, and check this out. When it talks about the labyrinth in the game in the instruction manual, when it gets to that part in the instruction manual, it says, it's like at the end of the manual, and right after that it says, hey, if you're having any trouble with this game, call this 1-900 number. So they knew you weren't going to get through that section of the game without calling their 1-900 number. So that labyrinth is put in this game, so you got to call a 1-900 number. And this brings up a point here, okay? So, I was watching the AVGN episode where he has the beat a game button, and he's saying, AVGN saying, you guys with your cheat codes and your save states, you guys just want to beat a game button. And why don't you just make a button, as soon as you beat it, you beat the game. And he's basically making fun of people like me that play games like this, where we use all these tools to beat the game. And I think that's wrong. And that example I just gave of the labyrinth is a good example to present an argument against the beat a game button argument. So that 1-900 number doesn't exist anymore. It'd be kind of funny to call it, see what happens. But so, this game was made with this 1-900 number in mind, but it's not there. So you need some other thing to get through that part. Also these games were made in a different era, and there's some other things going on back then that aren't going on now. Like back then you had 2 games to play a year. You get a game for Christmas, you got a game for your birthday, and you had to play that all year. So if you had 2 games to play all year, you'd want them to be long and difficult, and you wouldn't want to make them easy. But that ain't how we're playing when you're a grown man in 2021. You don't have the time. There's so many games and there's so little time. It doesn't make sense to play like that anymore. Also, these games were made with the rental market in mind, especially in North America. A good example of this is the game Contra Hardcore on the Sega Genesis. The Japanese ROM's easier, and the American ROM Konami made harder so that you couldn't beat it on a weekend rental, because our rental market was such a big deal in North America. They wanted to make sure if you rented it that you still had an incentive to go out and buy it. So they made the North American ROM more difficult. Well, we're not renting games anymore, so that shit don't apply. That 1-900 numbers don't apply. You're not playing 2 games a year. It just doesn't make sense to play these games the way they were designed back then. I'll give a couple more examples. I guess I don't need to, but this is something I obviously care about. I mean, I'm making a video about it. This is how I play games. Okay, so I'll use an analogy. If you're learning a musical instrument, and you're learning scales, you don't, what if someone came up and said, oh, you can't practice scales, you got to wait till that scale comes up in the song. You're cheating practicing scales. Or if they said, oh, you made a mistake in that song, you got to go back to the beginning of that song and wait till you get to that point again to play it. You can't just keep playing the problem part again. Well, that's what it is in video games. You get to a problem part in the game and you fail. You just want to practice it again right there till you figure it out. You don't want to go back to the beginning and wait. It just doesn't make sense. And then competitively, if you're playing competitive fighting games, Super Turbo, that's my jam. If you're playing that and you got this weird thing in your head where you can't use a trainer, you got to just play in an arcade against opponents, you're not going to learn super cancels and option selects at the same rate as somebody that's just practicing a super cancel over and over again for half an hour in a trainer. They're going to learn that super cancel far faster than you would just practicing. I don't know, you got an opportunity once every 5 minutes to practice, or once every half an hour, I don't know. So it just doesn't make sense, because that person's going to get better than you. It just, that's not what's happening here. Okay, one thing I wanted to add is that I don't know whether to include this in the getting to know it or routing it. I'll include it in the routing it phase of the game. When you're routing a game out, you also want to get experimental. So that's one of the benefits. I'm going to tell you guys about, I told you guys about how, we don't play games like we used to back in the day. And one of the beautiful parts of that is you can be more creative. Now that you have save states, you have cheat codes, you'll be freer to do things you wouldn't do back in the day. So say you're on a boss, you're towards the end, and you think maybe if you could get behind that boss, you could hit him, you know, and get in like a safe spot. But you wouldn't do that back in the day because it's too risky. You don't want to die and have to go back to the beginning of the game just to, you know, and then you'd have to wait and play through the whole game to practice on them again. It's too risky. But now with the save states, man, you can get creative and try all kinds of stuff. Like one thing I've noticed in a lot of shooting games, if you can park right on the enemy's head, for some reason, a lot of games, you can shoot him and it's a safe spot and you can do damage to him and he can't damage you. Like you might need to like move with him, like move your sprite as he moves, and it might be kind of hard, but that's a cool thing you can do. You know, just try to find exploits in the game, like get, you know, crazy. Like, you know, maybe if you jump off this cliff, maybe there's a secret down there, like in Rondo of Blood. If you fall down some pits on the Greek stage, you like end up on this lower part of the game and a whole new part of the game opens up. So yeah, you want to experiment with getting creative at this phase of the game. So yeah, you route out the game. After you're done routing, it's like time to execute. It's time to like sit down and beat the game. You know, I like to use the Mister when I actually sit down to beat games. I just think it's superior than using emulation. I mean, what else is there to say about executing, beating the game? You know, sit your ass down and do it. When you sit down and do it, of course, you can't use save states. You know, you can't use cheat codes now. You got to beat it legit. One thing I do like to do after I beat a game, I like to try to beat it immediately one more time if it's not too long of a game. Once you've routed it out, typically you got that game by the ass. It feels good to just beat it like 2 times in a row. You know, maybe you want to up the difficulty or something like that. Yeah. But yeah, that's about it. Go out there and beat some hard games for me, guys.